And welcome to another edition of Trade Talk. I ain't flipping leaving. I had to do one more episode. I know I said I was off to Europe, but flight got delayed a little bit. So get to jump in for one more episode. I'm very happy to do it because it was a massive weekend of footy. So much happening, so much controversy with the Ben Keays point, but I'm here to discuss it all with Darren Parkin. Daz, how are you, mate?
Going well. We spoke a lot about retirements last week. I wonder if any of them will do the about face. You must have been sitting in the lounge, the flight was delayed, and you thought, I'm not going to have a beer, I'm going to go in and do Trade Talk one more time. But yeah, what a round of footy. Your Blues cemented a spot in the 8, and so did a couple of other sides.
You have one of the greatest voices on the face of the planet. Tell us why you are without voice a little bit.
I got along on Saturday night to marvel, given the significance of St Kilda's game against Geelong, and yelled myself hoarse. And unfortunately, my voice is worse today than it was yesterday or Sunday. So I don't know what's going on there, but feeling the pinch. But fought it out for the team.
Well, Saint has secured their spot in the finals, which was very exciting. Todd, how are you, mate? And tell us about the Sainers there. What happened at Stats Insider in terms of the predictions there?
So last week we declared Saints as the best bet. So they got up across the board. 3 of their best bets for that one got up. Fortunately, we didn't have probabilities for Karl coming back for the final episode. We'll see if we can sort that out, or for Daz's voice coming back before the end of the week. But we'll see if we can sort something out before then.
Awesome, Todd. Yeah, well, it was an exciting weekend of footy, and it would just be absolutely remiss if we didn't talk about the biggest story of the week, and that was the match between the Crows and the Swans. Obviously, the Crows were down by 32 points at three-quarter time. They were $34 on the exchange at that point, if you don't mind, and they almost won. There was a chaos on the Betbury exchange late with that Ben Keays point, but before we go into the moments and the goal review system, everything, what were your thoughts on that game there, Daz?
Yeah, I mean, Sydney dominated for 3 quarters, super impressive performance. You sensed Adelaide would come back, and I guess it's kind of summed up Adelaide's season. They've lost so many close games. They got beaten by 1 point and 2 points by Collingwood, 4 points by Melbourne, 6 points by Brisbane, 1 point by Sydney, controversially. And in the end, that cost them. And I mean, they would have been annoyed, Adelaide fans, watching the Bulldogs lose on Sunday, thinking that's opened the door wide open for them to have gone into the 8 had they have won it. And yeah, I guess on the decision itself, we always talk, I mean, last week we had the controversial Melbourne-Carlton finish where the umpire backed himself, made a decision, went upstairs, and the technology couldn't support him. This time, obviously, technology would have answered the question. The umpire, I mean, on one hand, you take your hat off to an umpire saying, I'm very, very confident in this call. I'm making the decision. I don't need to review it. But you've got to be right if you're going to do that. And unfortunately, he wasn't. And look, normally that wouldn't matter so much, but the stakes were unbelievably high for both of those teams. And for Adelaide, it's a pretty bitter pill to swallow.
So we're going to go over some of the exchange prices. But just on that point, I think the process obviously failed a little bit there because there's no contingency plan to review points. It's only goals.
Correct.
I did say on radio on SEN that the field umpire probably should have showed a little bit of leadership, but I've since then upskilled myself a little bit. Obviously, umpiring is something I know absolutely nothing about, and there's comms and processes between all the umpires on the field to potentially put a review in place. The responsibility doesn't really get left with the field umpire. Look, it's human error. I thought it was outstanding effort, outstanding in the fact that it was a little bit of a surprise that the AFL came out and said that decision was wrong. It was also outstanding, and it was a good thing. I think admitting fault means that you can fix the mistakes in the future. I think that's really, really important. What happens now, though, Daz? Like, I've heard rumours about replaying that last 2 minutes. I don't know whether that's a fake story, a good story. I'm still watching things unfold.
I guess. I mean, and the reality is people talking about overturning the result. If it was after the siren, maybe, if there was no more play. But the reality is there would have been a centre bounce with 70 seconds to go, and Sydney could argue all day that we could have won the centre bounce, scored and won the game.
100%.
And Adelaide had a chance to win the ball back. I know Sydney took it pretty much coast to coast, but it's just really unfortunate. Obviously, we had the Siren Gate game in 2006 between St Kilda and Fremantle, but that was simply a case of the siren went and the umpire didn't hear it, so you can just stop play when the siren sounded. Yeah, this one, I was actually watching it at Marvel in a bar post-game because St Kilda were looking for Adelaide to win to cement their finals place, and the whole joint erupted when that ball went through for a goal, and then everybody was in disbelief at the decision. But in the end, look, Sydney benefit from it. They probably deserved to win on the balance of the game, but Adelaide could certainly have pinched it.
Before I get Todd's thoughts on this whole saga, I just want to talk about some of the exchange moves during that moment. So incredibly, the max price for Sydney in the whole game was $5.20, and it happened in that exact moment when punters in play and watching. So whether you were watching on TV or whether you were at the ground, who knows? But Sydney drifted to $5.20 at that moment because they were convinced that Ben Keays had kicked the goal. Adelaide had gotten as short as $1.24. And that all suddenly changed so quickly because the umpires called a behind, almost the odds reverse. And at that moment, then Adelaide probably got out to their max price, which was $1,000. But those exchange moves are so fascinating and crazy because at three-quarter time, as I said earlier, Adelaide were $34. They've gotten as short as $1.24. And then drifted back out to $1,000. So just incredible moves on the exchange there. But Todd, what did you make of the whole fiasco?
Well, first off, you guys summed it up pretty well. I didn't have too much to add, other than I really liked the external messaging from Adelaide. I thought they handled it really well. They just want to move on from it. They would have had pretty good recourse if it was after the siren, as Daz mentioned. But I think the best thing to do is just move on and not dwell on it too much. We've all seen the video of right in front of me. The Collingwood loss with Jack Anthony, but I think most Adelaide fans, while they feel pretty begrudged and fairly enough, I think the club just needs to move on and cop it.
Can't do much more.
Can't do much more there, absolutely. Todd, all right, let's talk about the Saints and the Cats in a little bit more detail. Obviously, the Saints were just incredible. And that's all she wrote for the Cats. They're not making the finals now.
Yeah, and a lot of people talking about, obviously, Geelong missing the finals as a reigning premier. It's probably not quite as rare as it might seem. So if you go in the AFL era, so that's back to 1990, it's the 7th time it's happened. So Collingwood in 91, Essendon 94, Adelaide 99, Hawthorn 2009, and then since then the Bulldogs in 17, Richmond in 21, and now Geelong. So it happens about 20% of the time, but just a year where Geelong couldn't really get going. They had moments where they were pretty good. They lost their first 3, so they were behind the 8 ball. They had a few injuries late in the season. They lost a couple of home games. It just didn't quite happen for them, and I guess they can reset and see where their veterans are at and go again. And as for St Kilda, it's their second finals appearance since 2011. The first was in the pandemic in 2020, so I guess it's their first normal finals appearance, if you will, in a regular season where their fans can get along. And yeah, it was a great atmosphere at Marvel on Saturday night, I guess a night where they had to take their opportunity because they were probably going to miss if they didn't win their own way in, and they did that. So look, credit to them. I think they've answered every challenge. And look, I know I am a St Kilda supporter, but I think the narrative around them has been at times harsh over the course of the season. I think they've spent the whole year in the 8. They've beaten every other finals contender except Adelaide. Only Collingwood, Melbourne and St Kilda have spent the whole season in the 8. And I reckon there was always an expectation that they'd fall out, and they haven't.
It's a bit of a weird one. I mean, we got to move on, but Ross Lyon did question some players in his team and the list, and this is now a team that's gone on to play finals. So I probably agree with you. I reckon the coaches probably get, and players probably get put under so much pressure due to these reactionary comments. I think people should just let the season play out and go from there. But just quickly, we're going to touch on the Dogs and the Eagles, and that was a massive loss to the Dogs. And obviously, another result that sent the exchange into chaos because the Eagles are now the favourite, the drifter in the least wins market on the Betfair Exchange, and the new favourite is now North Melbourne, who play Gold Coast this week.
Yeah, and look, a winnable game, but I mean, they've lost 20 in a row, North, so clearly they're going to be underdogs in it, but clearly the upset of the season for a number of reasons. The Eagles, as much as they've been more competitive at home, I mean, they got belted in the derby last week, but they had been better at home. They'd still struggled on the road. They've been getting touched up every time they left Perth. And the Bulldogs had everything on the line. So you'd sit there and think with all of the opportunity in front of the Bulldogs and everything they had to play for against a team that couldn't travel, especially when they were in front at three-quarter time, that they would do enough. But yeah, it's a potentially catastrophic loss, even though they can still make the 8.
And it's going to be interesting what happens in the final round because They are fighting for that 8th spot, and it also means that Carlton will play either GWS or the Western Bulldogs in their first final. But Todd, I just want to find out from Stats Insider's perspective, how did you guys handle that Doggies and Eagles game? Surely there wasn't any surprises there.
So with the Bulldogs, they went in with a pretty overwhelming chance, but I like to call this one the Dumb and Dumber Lloyd Christmas. So we gave the Eagles a 1% chance. So we were saying there was a chance, and we're calling it 1% chance. Still is a chance. We called this one.
And you could tell pretty early that they were right in it. I know they started well, but it kind of felt sustainable the way they were playing. You're like, they're going to be in this, even if they don't win it, they're going to take it deep.
I'm not surprised at all to see the Trade Talk medal vote getters here, but I'm going to go to the honourable mentions first in the Trade Talk medal, and looking forward to seeing what the final results are of the medal in next week's episode. But Lachie Neale obviously had a fantastic game, predicted to get votes. We'll see there. Jack Sinclair, Zach Butters, really back in form now and making a late Brownlow run again. Tom Green, Sam Flanders has just been excellent. We've spoken about him over the last couple of weeks, and Dustin Martin. We're going to talk about him as a potential All-Australian in our next deep dive. But take us away with the votes, the 3-2-1 does.
All forwards, a big forward love in this week. So
Love that.
Jamie Cripps was the match winner for West Coast. Kicked 5, kicked 3 in the last quarter to get them home. Charlie Curnow, that was an absolute definition of a match-winning performance. He kicked 5 to set up the victory, and then he went behind the footy and took marks to save the game as well, including the one in the last 20 seconds. And look, Jesse Hogan, I know the Giants had a picnic, but 17 marks and 9 goals is a pretty special game. So, Jesse Hogan, career highs across the board and gets 3 votes for that.
Just one thing on Jesse Hogan. I love how much he's matured as a player. Teammates were looking for him to get his 10th, and he wasn't phased at all. It wasn't the me show. He had a fantastic performance and kicked his 9 goals. But he was telling people to go for their shots and start just continue playing the good footy that GWS were playing. Love the maturity of Jesse Hogan. And Charlie Curnow, as you say, he was simply unbelievable. One thing that you didn't mention was he was goal assisting from just the most outrageous places on the ground. He was kicking. He was turning around onto that right foot, and we were talking and we'll probably speak about this in the All-Australian segment, but he is the right-footed Buddy Franklin of the competition, and probably of all time, the closest thing to Buddy Franklin on a right foot that we're ever going to get.
And I think that's right. His field kicking's elite for a big man, just like Buddy's was as well, moving around the ground, but his ability to lace up targets if he marks the ball on the wing or half forward is as good as anyone else in that team. And obviously he's got Harry Mackay down there that he can feed, and other players too. So, he's a phenomenal player. He's in the conversation to be the best player in the comp.
Absolutely. Well, it segues perfectly into our deep dive this week, and we're keen to get Todd's thoughts throughout on both of our teams. But we're going to talk about our All-Australian selections. I think it's a great time to be doing it with one round to go. Just before we dive into who we think should be in the All-Australian team, I think we wanted to kick off quickly just talking about how we don't want to put midfielders in positions that
Just
those
to get
players,
him in like a half-back
exactly.
flank or a forward pocket or something like that.
Absolutely.
And like Dane Swan, I think, was forward pocket in an All-Australian side.
Absolutely.
Once.
And the context I want to give is that in the NBA, there's an all-first team and an all-second team. And generally in the NBA, they've obviously got their positions: point guard, shooting guard, power forward, and centre. If you're trying to sneak someone in the first team, you can't put a point guard at centre, you can't put a centre at point guard just because they've had an outstanding season. You have to put a centre next to a centre and make a decision who's better, and make the tough decision to leave someone out. So I think we've got some massive players missing out and unlucky, but that's the way it should be, right? I also spoke on radio earlier in the week that I named my top 5 players in the competition, and whilst I think Nick Dacos is an incredible player, if he is going to be in midfield contention throughout, he has to take Petrarca's spot or Marcus Bontempelli's spot to be in that top 5. So I think we're both in agreement on that, and we've named our teams accordingly. But I'm going to let you kick off and talk us through your All-Australian team and a little bit about why you've chosen these players.
So from the back line, Cal Wilkie, leading mark taker in the AFL this year, also high up in intercept. Sam Taylor at the Giants has claimed some huge scalps. He's at fullback, and James Sicily, I know he's missed some games with suspension, but he's had a phenomenal season. Halfbacks are Dan Houston at Port Adelaide, a career best year by a long way. Darcy Moore has been elite for Collingwood. I know he's had some injuries in the last couple of weeks. Jack Sinclair backing up his All-Australian year from last year. Josh Dacos on the wing. Zach Butters, we mentioned that he's had an outstanding season. He's in the centre. Errol Goulden has taken his game to a whole new level. He's on the wing. At the Sydney Swans. Christian Petrarca, I've got him half forward because he obviously spends a lot of time as that hybrid mid forward. Tex Walker at centre half forward, having a career year at his age, is tremendous. Toby Green could have won the Coleman if he didn't miss games with injury. He's been that good this year as the captain as well. Charlie Cameron in the forward pocket, still the competition's best small forward. Charlie Curnow, who we mentioned at full forward. I've actually got Kyle Langford in the pocket. He's kicked 50 goals as a medium forward, undersized a bit in that Essendon forward line. I think he's done a really good job. I think Tim English, for most of the year, has justified being the number one ruckman in the team. Marcus Bontempelli alongside him in the middle. And then Nick Dacos rounds out my midfield group. On the bench, I've got 5 because I figure you'd pick a sub, so I've got 5 and one of them would be the sub. I've got Jordan Dawson from the Adelaide Crows, Zach Merritt from Essendon, Caleb Sarong from Fremantle. I've got Rowan Marshall as my second ruckman, and I've squeezed Tim Taranto in there potentially as the sub. So my unluckiest players are Nick Larkey at the Kangaroos, Harris Andrews is pretty stiff for Brisbane, Lachie Neale, Libba from the Bulldogs, who's missed the last couple, and Jacob Wiedering, I think, has had a pretty good year. I've named Darcy Moore my captain, and I've named Marcus Bontempelli my vice-captain. Craig McRae of the Magpies is my coach. And my senior assistants, I've actually named 3 senior assistants because I think they've done a very good job. Michael Voss, Ken Hinkley, Ross Lyon.
Yep, love it, Daz. And I'm curious to ask, why didn't you put Nick Dacos on the half back line? You've elected to chuck him in the midfield.
I just think that towards the back end of the year when he was doing his best work, it was when he was getting up around stoppages. So I think the half-back roles, you've got those guys like Sinclair and Houston that have been creative, and I reckon Nick Dacos has spent enough time in the middle, or at least enough time at stoppages to justify that.
Yep, fair enough, Daz. I've actually gone a little bit different, but I feel like we got a similar flow here. But reading them out quickly, full back line is James Sicily, Harris Andrews, Tom Stewart. Half back line is Jack Sinclair. He's had an amazing season. Darcy Moore and Nick Dacos. I've elected to chuck him on the half back line. The centres, I've got Josh Dacos. He's an absolute lock on one wing for me, and Marcus Bontempelli in the middle of the ground with Errol Goulden on the other wing. His second half of the season also has been spectacular and really paralleling the form of St Kilda Sydney at the moment. Half forward line, Toby Green, Taylor Walker, Dustin Martin. The full forward line, Charlie Cameron, Charlie Curnow, and Brian Myers, which some may find surprising, but he's broken the all-time assist record, and I think a player like that should be recognised.
Question without notice, who held the record before?
Jason Ackermanis.
Yes, well done.
Jason Ackermanis, a fantastic player. Max Gawn in the ruck, Christian Petrarca and Zach Butters on ball. The interchange, I went really late with getting another ruckman in there. I was almost just going to go with Max Gawn as the solitary ruckman, but I've gone with Tim English, Dan Houston, another magnificent season, Jordan Dawson, Zach Merritt, and I'm going the sub to be Isaac Quain, or probably another left field one. Coach Craig McRae. I'm going to make Marcus Bontempelli my captain, and my vice captain is going to be Toby Green. Todd, have we left anyone out that you're enraged with? Who are the players that you're really keen to see in that team?
Well, you've both given Lachie Neale the flick, and he's in our top 5 for AFL player ratings. So I don't know what Lachie's done to either of you two, but I think he probably could have snuck in for a bench spot. But otherwise, you've picked 2 great sides. I'm just curious to ask Daz, though, how do you reckon Ross Lyon would go as an assistant coach? I don't think he'd be too happy with that.
No, neither would Hinkley for that matter. Voss, perhaps he's probably done that role a bit at Port Adelaide. But yeah, it'd be an interesting coaching group. It's like the international rules when they bring all of the leading coaches along the way.
Yeah, that's right. That was a really good segment. Keen to hear on social media. Actually, what we might do is get both the teams out and chuck a vote out.
And one for Todd as well, because you mentioned Dustin Martin. Essendon's Nick Martin's had a pretty good season as well, so he would have to be perhaps in the frame.
Yeah, so unfortunately, given he is ranked as a midfielder, he doesn't quite stack up alongside other players because there's such a breadth of midfielders in there. But you're right, Daz, he's had a great season. Probably a lot like Essendon's season, tailed off a bit when it's really mattered alongside guys like Mason Redmond. But Nick Martin, second-year player, like Nick Dacos, just excelled in a new role. And yeah, he's got one of those guys who's going to look to make the All-Australian team going forward.
Averaging 24 possessions and a goal a game, as well as 4 inside 50s and 3 tackles. So having a pretty good season.
He certainly had a fantastic season. Well, it all comes down to this round, the Brownlow medal, and this is the all-important Brownlow predictions segment. Looking forward to hearing what Todd has to say about the Brownlow medal too. But let's have a look at the leaderboard. Nick Dacos still in front. Not clear vote games potentially from Marcus Bontempelli and Christian Petrarca. It looks like Marcus Bontempelli is going to get the predicted vote in the last round. Is he going to catch? Who knows? But Nick Dacos on top, 30 votes. Second, Marcus Bontempelli with 27 predicted votes. Christian Petrarca third with 26 predicted votes. Lachie Neale is probably a bit of a dark horse on 26 votes as well. Zach Butters is making a late run, had predicted votes in his last 3 games. He's on 23 votes. Tim Taranto, 22.5. Zach Merritt, obviously ineligible for the medal, but he's on 21.5 votes currently. You'd have to say that they're probably the most likely players to finish on top in the Brownlow medal. Anything that strikes your eye, Daz?
Just, I guess it's banging the same drum again, but Christian Petrarca predicted to be on 26 votes, 740. Zach Butters predicted to be on 23 votes, 760. Lachie Neale also predicted to be on 26 votes, the same as Petrarca, $23. So for a former winner, again, I mean, he's listed to be 1 vote behind Bontempelli. Bontempelli's $2.90 and Lachie Neale's $23. So I'm not saying he should be favourite, but he shouldn't be $23. He should be a third of that, you'd think. He should be somewhere between $6 and $9, I would think. So it's just, I think it's simply backable because the price is what it is. He's well over the odds.
I think there's a fair few punters out there that have taken futures multis and have Nick Dacos in there as one of their futures picks. A lot of Pies supporters have done that. I just think you have to lay. I just think you have to lay. I'm looking, he hasn't, obviously he's been injured, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 games he's going to be without getting a vote. That's just too many in my eyes. I don't think he can be holding on for that long. And as a second-year player, I think the umpires potentially aren't going to be noticing him when we look back at the stats and say, like, yeah, he's had 30 and whatever. But, are the umpires thinking that at the time? In hindsight's an interesting thing. Marcus Bontempelli's firming. I think he obviously had a predicted vote according to the predictor in the most recent week. A couple of weeks ago, he had a 3-vote game. His team just needs him to have a 3-vote game to win. Obviously, Geelong.
The Cats might put the queue in the rack this week, potentially. Obviously, with season over, we're already hearing that Cameron and Hawkins unlikely to play. So would suggest that Geelong have got an eye on 2024, so that might be a chance for the Dogs to get hold of them, obviously coming off a low form base. What
do you think, Todd? Do you think Nick Dacos will be hanging on at this point of the year, or do you reckon the others have him covered?
No, you made the point, Karl. If he's missed too many games, and when you're playing a guy like Bontempelli, who's playing every week versus someone who cannot get a vote, it makes it very tough. I wanted to throw one back to both of you guys though, but Marcus Bontempelli jumped back to the top of our player ratings after his game. Where does he rank against West Coast? Obviously, shock loss, but 32 touches, 10 tackles, 12 clearances, and 162 Supercoach points, which is usually a pretty good indicator of impact in a game. Where does that rank, and do you think that gets him amongst the votes?
Well, it's interesting because the most influential player was Jamie Cripps, and forwards don't usually get votes, or at least they don't get 3 votes. West Coast best midfielder was probably Tim Kelly over the course of the game. Bontempelli's had similar numbers to him. I don't think any of his teammates, maybe Treloar, I thought Treloar played a pretty good game. Tim English was solid. But yeah, he'd have to be I don't think he'll get 3 just by virtue of the fact that they lost, but 2 is a possibility.
I think 2 is definitely a possibility. I find in those close losing games, usually the losing team, their best player ends up getting 2 votes, and that's how they sort of even it out. Tim Kelly had an awesome game as well. He's had a magnificent season too. Gone really underrated, I think, obviously, because the West Coast Eagles haven't gone that well. Yeah, it's going to be a really tight one. Have been disappointed a little bit with Christian Petrarca over the last couple of weeks. It's still not out of the realm of possibility that he doesn't get votes in his round 22 game, but probably 22 touches and a goal in his last game. He obviously had a few goal assists too. He had a lot of clearances, but I think a lot of it came late in the game when it was sort of done and cooked. So Christian Petrarca there. Let's talk about Lachie Neale. Do we think, and I'll start with you, Todd, do you think he's over the odds there? He's currently $23 on the exchange. He's currently even third on 26 votes with Christian Petrarca, but the price discrepancy is massive there.
Yeah, you've spoken about him almost every week, that he's fluctuated every week, but he's ranked number 1 in clearances per game with the AFL, top 5 for us. He's just a guy that's a proven vote getter, and we know how important that is. And you mentioned it before, Karl, with Nick Dacos. Sometimes it takes the umpires a little bit longer to cotton on to players, and Nick Dacos may be a victim of that, but Lachie Neale definitely isn't. And he's one guy that, he may be the Patrick Cripps of 2023 that pops up where you don't expect him to and get Jags one of those 3-vote games where you're not expecting it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's spot on, Todd. And I think that this will all segue into our next segment, which is buy, hold and sell. I'm going to kick it straight off with you, Daz, because you're going to be buying and looking at the Brownlow medal.
Yeah, it's those 2 that we've mentioned again. Christian Petrarca, I just think on the body of work, we spoke about Bontempelli last week and sticking with that, but I just think playing with those players around it, Lachie Neale especially, just on the odds that he is at the moment, I just think you have to have a nibble at that, because I think he should be exactly where Petrarca and Bontempelli are. So if we're contemplating Petrarca and Bontempelli on price, you're getting triple that price for Lachie Neale, who's had a very similar season. So I just think it's logical that you go down that path. And the other one is with Brisbane and Port Adelaide both favoured to win this week, you would then back the winner of the qualifying final between those 2 sides to play in the grand final, because they'll host a prelim. So I think you got $2.24 on Brisbane to make the grand final and $3 on Port to make the grand final. So I'd be having a look at both of those as well.
Yeah, Daz, I reckon you're spot on there. And I'm just going to talk quickly. My question here was, is Neale a good price? And just in the discussion we've had together, I think he definitely is. He's on the same predicted votes as Christian Petrarca and like much more than double the price, almost triple the price. So I think having a couple of dollars and just increasing that book on Neale, you kind of just have to. Petrarca certainly has drifted, and I don't think he is a player that you should jump off. If anything, given he's drifted, you could potentially have a couple more dollars on just to make sure that you're taking advantage of that price, because if he does have a 3-vote game again, he's just going to shorten incredibly. And you can always have a bit of a back-to-lay strategy there. We haven't got any holds this week. I think we're too far into the season to hold. I think we're going to be buying and selling. So who are you going to be selling this week, Daz?
I'm selling several things. I thought Simon Goodwin's comments were a bit rich in regards to Finn McGuinness in the tagging role, saying he's not interested in getting a ball and things like that. I think everyone's got taggers, every team. If you look at that head-to-head, I think he's had 14 possessions and Oliver's had 15. So he's had the same amount of possessions as his direct opponent, and it's his job to obviously restrict him. So I think they've got to work through that. I didn't like that all that much, but also suggestions. West Coast had an uplifting victory that kickstarts them into next year. They've had a horrible season, one of the worst teams that we've ever seen, but it shows that there's still a degree of fight in them, and they were able to do that. And all the commentary, not all of the commentary, but a lot of the commentary post-game was, should they have lost? They've missed out on pick 1 and Harley Reid. At the end of the day, things like that are always going to be far more important than, they're still going to get access to a very good player. And I think you learn more about winning on the road coming from behind than you could ever gain from one more draft position.
Yeah, and I think winning comes first.
100%.
Every single time. What do you think about that, Todd?
Yeah, completely agree. It's really unfortunate for Adam Simpson. He goes into that game against Essendon and he gets criticised for not putting numbers behind the ball, and then they beat the Western Bulldogs and he gets criticised for not doing it. He can't win even when they win. it's unfortunate for Simo, but I completely agree. Winning culture is much more important than draft picks, and there's every chance that Harley Reid walked from West Coast like Jason Horne-Francis did the year before. So I think fair play to West Coast. They've done the right thing, and it means that the North Melbourne's 87.7% chance to be the team with the most losses, which is probably going to be the case at the end of the season.
Yeah, wow. I bet all those Gold Coast players are going to be playing their absolute heart outs, given Dimmer Hardwick's going to be watching closely. And yeah, I think it's going to be extra incentive to perform as best as possible. So
the only comeback bigger than yours was Dimmer back into the Gold Coast realm.
Let's talk about, we've already mentioned this already, Marcel absolutely has to be Nick Dacos, because I think he's way too short considering he's missed the last 7 games, or going to miss his 7th game.
It's a long time to hold on to a lead.
That is a long time, and he's currently a 31% chance on the Betfair Exchange to win that Brownlow medal. I just think that if you've had a bet on him at a bigger price, there's no reason why you shouldn't be hedging your bets just slightly, given the competitiveness of the Brownlow medal at this really deep end of the season. So I think it would be absolutely remiss not to lay Nick Dacos a little bit to win your stake back. I think that is the key Betfair Exchange move there. So I'm laying Nick Dacos. I want to improve my position on Bont and Petrarca and potentially Neil if he comes in late. And I think that's probably the best wagering advice that we could potentially give you here on this show. And this is what the Betfair Exchange is all about, and AFL Trade Talk. We trade in and out of our positions. And that will flow straight onto our trading strategies where, we'll be laying Nick Dacos for the Brownlow medal, and we'll see what happens this week. What do you think, Daz?
Yeah, and I always look at some of the head-to-head markets and see, I guess, thoughts on that, and keen to get sort of Todd's input on that. I know Fremantle have been better in the last month, but I think the way Hawthorn are finishing the year, hosting a game against Fremantle, $1.61 is a pretty good price. It just feels like Fremantle would be a little bit vulnerable in that match. Adelaide $1.22 against the Eagles, $3.50. I know the Crows will be potentially flat given what happened last week and the Eagles had a win, but it feels like a reactive price. It feels like at no other stage of the season would you have got odds like that. Adelaide would have been $1.04 potentially. And I still think they've got too much talent to lose that game. And the other one, Sydney are $1.84 against Melbourne. Sydney will be playing for a home final, and Melbourne may well be in a position where their ladder position cannot possibly change. So if Port Adelaide and Brisbane both win, Melbourne will be anchored into 4th spot, thinking about Collingwood in the first week of the finals. Sydney with everything to play for, that might be enough to swing that $1.84 their way.
Yep, lovely. Does anything that Stats Insider want to do this week, Todd?
I reckon Daz has been reading Stats Insider, because I'm taking a look now, and he's pretty much picked our best edges for the week. So the Adelaide Crows at 6% currently on the Betfair Exchange with that edge. The Sydney Swans 2% edge against the Demons, so that was a great call there. And of course, Hawthorn, which they go into that game with a 4% edge against Fremantle, who haven't been great on the road, and the Hawks have been ending the season sensationally. So 3 great calls from Daz there.
Yeah, lovely, Todd. I just want punters to go have a look at some of the markets on the Betfair Exchange. There's a new Brownlow and Premiership double market. There looks like some really nice odds there, just increasing a little bit more value if you're keen on Nick Dacos, Christian Petrarca, Marcus Bontempelli. There's some really nice odds there. We had a look at the top non-Victorian team last week. That was between Brisbane and Port. That market's obviously going to be done.
Both favourites this week. Whoever loses, or whoever wins. If Brisbane win, they've got the advantage of the percentage gap. Port have to have Brisbane lose. So.
But I'll basically be having the biggest look at that Brownlow medal market, and hoping that Marcus Bontempelli, Lachie Neale and Christian Petrarca have big games this week. That's all we've got time for this edition of Trade Talk. I'm going to say another final goodbye and thank you for a massive year, and look forward to getting stuck into it and talking finals and watching in from overseas. But thank you so much, Todd. It's been pretty good, hasn't it?
It's been great. I won't give you an official goodbye because I can't guarantee you won't be here, but it's been great and I'm looking forward to a huge final series coming up.
What about you, Daz? Looking forward to finals?
Yeah, it's nice to know we'll both be there. So yeah, very relaxing at least to sit back and toast that. And I'm sure you'll be flying home in a month for the granny.
Absolutely, and hopefully looking forward to it. Well, if you want all our trading strategies and to watch the full show, head to the Betfair Hub now.
What's gambling really costing you? For free and confidential support, call the number on the screen or visit the website.